Welcome back, all my 40K fanatics out there. I'm DJ here with Tim's Nation to talk to you guys about terrain. I've had a couple comments about my terrain set, people who like it, other people who want to see me get a second one. And trust me, I'm in the process of getting a second terrain set to change stuff up here on the table. But there's a lot of other stuff that I want to invest into to support the channel and with cameras and upgrading everything so that I can increase the quality of the content that I'm putting out there for everybody. There is stuff to be said about getting sponsorships and merchandising and things like that. It's all stuff that I'm working on, but being the fact that as I've said before, I'm a three-time full-time employee. I'm a full-time father, a full-time worker, and full-time to 40K. So with that being said, it's difficult to research some of those things. I got a couple guys coming on board that I'm not going to reveal just yet because they don't know I'm making the video. So I'm going to be respectful to them and wait over time for them to give the go-ahead to be introduced on the channel formally. But there is a couple guys locally in the area that we're in conversation and talk to get some support to help me with some of the editing so that I can take the time to send out emails and contact people about things like merchandising, sponsorships, and the terrain. For now, today though, I want to talk to you about terrain as far as my setup is on my table, what some of these things mean, and try and give you guys a way to start the conversation on how terrain functions in your gaming group so that you can have fun. Nothing ruins a time more on a game. And I've seen this happen before, where you put a model in a piece of terrain or behind a wall, thinking that it can't be seen, thinking that he's safe from being shot. And then the next turn, you get shot. And your opponent may argue why they're getting shot at or what they see, and you disagree with it. But you're there to have a good time. You're there to play a game with your friend and don't mind as much. But then after that moment causes you to lose, and then you're on your drive home, it may leave you with a sour feeling in your stomach. And those are things that I want to try and avoid amongst the table, and with conversations and questions you can ask and establish before the game or during the game to be able to make sure that you know and understand, and your opponent as well knows and understands how the table is going to work that you're currently playing on. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do. Turn on the bell for notifications. Get notified on more videos such as this one, as well as faction-focused videos and battle reports that I'm getting 1 to 2 out a week. Right now, I've been on a good cycle of 2, but some weeks might only be 1. It just depends on my schedule and schedule of other people. And editing battle reports is time consuming, but I've gotten a little bit quicker with it, so I'm able to put these out faster, and I want to try and get more of those out on the table, showcasing even more of the armies in this game. So with that being said, and I appreciate you guys, that tends to be the YouTube trend, is that we need to make sure that we get those things out there, because it is very important to us when we get the subscribers. Until YouTube sees that I have 1,000 plus subscribers, they will not really recognize me as in the realm for monetization, so that I can get extra support to get other things on the channel like cameras, etc. So it is a constant struggle to always ask and plead to have people subscribe to the channel, because it is seriously probably one of the biggest ways that you can support any content creator at all, is simply by subscribing to the channel. It's super important to them. And I can speak for many other content creators. It is one of the most rewarding feelings when someone subscribes to your channel and really helps you and makes you feel validated on the information you're trying to bring and trying to create out there for everybody. And that's one of the reasons that the biggest strive I've been to do this, when there's times where I look at this and go, can I keep going? Can I keep doing this? And I get the comments, the subscriptions, and all of the flow has just made me feel like, you know what? Yes, I need to keep pushing through with some of this stuff. It's some long nights, like I said, full-time father, full-time worker, full-time content creator now. And it gets tiring. Those comments, the subscriptions, those are what really keep me going. Not to mention the fact that my son loves the fact that I have a YouTube channel and keeps asking me to make his own, but we'll deal with that subject later. Right now, for those people who have talked to me, there are some newer gamers out there. And this is one of the difficult things when it comes to the game, is terrain. because what I have at my house might be different than what you have at your house, may be different than what you have at your game store, may be different than what you may see at a tournament. And I want to go over all that real quick. And I should be able to make this into I want to make this a compressed video and allow you guys to comment down below if there's still some questions you have, so I know where to take the direction of some of this, especially with the terrain. Well, so if you're going to a tournament, you're going to a grand tournament. From what I've seen, a lot of the TOs will release in their tournament pack how many pieces of terrain you will have on each table, whether it's player placed or not. If it's not player placed, what the setup's going to look like, and what each of the pieces of terrain will mean in the places that they're placed on the table. So usually if you sit down and take some time and read the tournament pack, you can figure out everything for your terrain and everything for your table before the event. Now, the only issue with that is, what if you don't understand what that terrain means? So we're going to cover some of the most basic terrain traits. And we're going to go back with that in what a terrain trait is. So one of the things, if you look in the Games Workshop section of the terrain book, it does say that there are many different terrain traits for pieces of terrain. It gives recommendations on what you could use for this terrain, but realistically, what it all comes down to is agreed upon what they are. So if you have a piece of terrain that is a square, such as this one, that you want to say, okay, this is going to represent dense terrain. Well, the reason we use this as dense terrain on my table is it's easier to move models through it and not beat up your hands and not beat up your models. And it gives a floor plan for exactly where dense terrain is going to be. Sometimes with these, in some different tournaments I've been at, they have trees that are magnetized to them so that you can remove them when you need to move models through, or other little pieces that you can put on them for decoration to represent the dense terrain. But those can be moved away and still give you the space of where the dense terrain begins and ends. Dense terrain typically is one with the dense cover effect, which means that they're -1 to hit. That's the terrain trait that you'll see most commonly with dense terrain. Now, if you are running a casual game, this does not mean that you have to stick to just the fact of dense terrain is only a -1 to hit buff for the unit inside being shot at inside of it. This is a terrain trait that could be assigned to something else based on your game. And that's the nice thing. One of the nice things with casual games is that you can look at pieces of terrain and assign them traits. And then when your opponent or your friend asks, well, what is that terrain? What does it do? You can tell them the traits, and those traits will then be followed by in the book and help you to interact with then your rule book or your codex specific rules. So if you are doing a campaign with some of your friends and you do have convoluted terrain, the easy way around this is to maybe make a little note card, fold it like a triangle, place it next to the terrain, and write just the name of the terrain traits that you want to associate with those terrain. Now, on the more competitive level, yes, the terrain is more simplified into what it is. It's going to be this many pieces, and they do this, and that's it. One of which is dense terrain. Dense terrain usually gives you a -2 to move through it, and as well as the unit inside would be -1 to hit, as is stated. Now, the other common piece of terrain is runes. Runes are one that we hear a lot of conversation about, and some of the ways that they function might be confusing, especially with some of the Games Workshop pictures where they have a plastic square underneath it, and others may say, well, what does that plastic square mean? So one of the things that I always have to remind people with Warhammer when we start talking about how terrain works and realism is, this is a game. And because it's a game, it has rules. And those rules are defined to allow things to operate fairly within the confines of its own rules. That means that some of the fluff-based or the way that a terrain may look or function or act may not exactly be the way that you think it should act, just because of the way it looks on the table. An example of it is where I have this piece of terrain right here that typically is sitting right in the middle. Now, this piece of terrain usually represents a rune, but it may not exactly be 5 inches tall, where they talk about runes being 5 inches tall in the main rule book. But me and my opponent have decided to declare that that's what it represents and that's what it is. The terrain in the middle is obscuring, which means that any unit that is 18 wounds or less behind it cannot be seen and shot at from units from the other side. Now, with the pieces of terrain in the middle, they have the ability that once you touch them, you can then see through them, which typically is common for a lot of runes. Once you move inside it, you then go to true line of sight. True line of sight is like it says. Whenever you look at if your model's eye view can see another model, then they can shoot at them. So what is the reason then for these squares that we see on the table? And one of the reasons that I use terrain such as this one that's already a square. At the same time, I often talk about this piece of terrain, and I leave this on the table because this piece actually is more of a clear representation of what we're talking about with these other squares. So this piece of terrain, as you can notice, has windows in the front and is open in the back, but is also on that square, which we've seen some of the Games Workshop terrain have a plastic or clear square about it. So what this means is that this obscuring rune will give you cover if you're inside it for +1 to your saving throw. But if you are behind the terrain feature, you are obscured and cannot be shot at if you're 18 wounds or less. Things like the Silent King, Angron, they love this. So with this piece of terrain on the table, if any units I place back here or here off of this piece, you would not be able to see them. Now, when you move onto the piece of terrain, then things change. And this is where it becomes very, very important to clarify this with your opponents. So this piece of terrain, as you can see in the front, does have all these windows on it. Well, what we've done for our games is declare that there are no windows. They're boarded up, they're closed, you can't see through them. So if you are in that terrain and you are on the first floor of the building, you are obscured because there's no way you can see through it. If you are something like the Silent King, who is a very tall model, and you move into it, well, you could be seen through the second floor, which is now a visible area, so then you can be shot through it. So by moving onto the terrain feature, large models that normally couldn't be seen in the back off of it now can be seen because of their height and the way that the rune works. The rune works as being a 2-story building where the first floor is completely boarded up and still provides line of sight, so infantry and stuff can take up home in there and not get shot at. And once you move up to the second floor, you can then shoot out and be shot at the same time. Again, back to the Silent King. Once he moves onto it, he's going to be seen no matter what. But those are things that you should clearly define with your opponent beforehand, whether it's a casual game or a competitive game. Place your models on the table, discuss what the pieces of terrain are and how they will function. Are you using windows? Are you going to use these little cracks in the walls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Those are very, very important things to clearly define so that you and your opponent can have an enjoyable game. Again, going back to the terrain in the middle, some of the other ones, such as these ones that I have up front, have space in between them, right here, where the way they're set on the table. Now, if I don't clearly define what this terrain's role is and what this is doing, someone could move up to it and say, well, I can see through the hole in it, so I'm going to shoot through it. But that's not the intent. That's not the intent of how the terrain I want it to function with the table and how it should work. So if I don't inform my opponent of that before the game, that's kind of something that falls on me, being that it's my table and my house. I should inform my opponent of that ahead of time, going, hey, so this is how we play this terrain. This is how these pieces work. Another big thing with terrain in that is try to make sure that there's enough distance between your terrain on the table that the majority of vehicles up to the size of like a Imperial Knight base can slide through it. You don't want to have your table so covered in terrain that models can't move and vehicles can't get through it, because then it just kind of deters the fact of some of the really cool, awesome looking vehicle models from seeing time on your table. And lastly, probably the biggest and most important thing is look at it from both players' perspective on what is going to be fun. If you have an army that is a total incomplete gun line, and then you want to put 3 trees on your table, your opponent is going to have a horrible night, because as they're running their Blood Angels into your Tau and you're just shooting everything to oblivion, congratulations. Tau shoot really, really well. And you've just made a friend not want to play 40K anymore, because they may have thought that you may be their gatekeeper into this game. And you've given them the experience and the belief that they need guns. Their guns can't compete with the guns of the Tau or the Votann. So unless they play Tau or Votann, they're going to lose every single game. And that's not the case. You know, the table should have enough terrain that both combat and shooting sides can participate in well. I've seen some tournaments where they do a middle, where there's light terrain, medium terrain, heavy terrain, and that's interesting and fine too, because that you can't predict what table you're going to end up on, and you may end up on a terrain that's a heavy terrain table into a shooting matchup and be able to walk through it, only to then later on be into a shooting army that on a small light terrain, easy lines of sight to draw, and your army then struggles. So that's not something that you can plan for. In a player place terrain environment, you definitely want to glance through the tournament pack before you go and see how many of each of the pieces they plan on putting there and what sizes they are, and practice around those and see and also how they're going to be laid on the table. There's some grids and hierarchies that might require 2 pieces to be directly in the center line, 3 across each opponent's board edge, etc. So keep those in mind. There's a lot of, and this is kind of the D&D function of the game, where it's ask your dungeon master is a question that's often thrown around. For Warhammer, it's ask your TO, ask your friend. Make sure to have those conversations. What are these pieces of terrain? What are they doing? What do they look like? How does something like this, if someone were to come to my house, they may look at this and go, how does this work? I can't go inside that building. There's no, and what do I just climb on top? But do I move into it? Or then I can tell them, oh, this gray piece of terrain over here, think of that as what this looks like. There is an L around the corners that is pointing into the middle. That is a complete and total wall that blocks all line of sight from the first floor. If you move up to the second floor, you can shot out, but you can also be seen. If you move into it with a large model, the model will be able to be seen through the second floor. But as long as you stay off the base of the model and stay behind it with your models, then you are not able to be seen and are obscured. Hopefully this helps you guys understand terrain better and help you guys decide on maybe some terrain ideas that you have for your own gaming table that you thought this might not work, or this isn't going to look like what it is. If it looks good, just talk to your opponent about what rules you want to use for that piece of terrain. I promise you that 9 times out of 10, you will find that that's the easiest way to make your terrain set, your beautiful terrain, look good, work great, and have a good time for you and your opponent for many, many games to come. If you guys haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do turn on that bell for notifications, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Thank you very much for watching.